glad you could join us on another conversation on Business Redefined. The CMA Coffee Regulations of 2020 placed the trading of coffee under the ambit of the Capital Markets Authority. I've received many questions around this, and which other person better placed to comment on this than the man in charge of the Capital Markets Authority, Mr. Wycliffe Shamia. Always a delight to host you.
Thank you. Thank you this morning.
Let's kick this off. For those of us who might not have an idea how we got to this point where CMA is actually involved in the licensing, give us some background.
Sometime around 2016, we had a discussion around how commodity markets can also be made more vibrant, not only in Kenya, East Africa, and even the countries around us. So from those discussions, there was a national task force which was formed to look at how do you then, of course, alongside the directive, work on our coffee sector within Kenya. And this task force came up with certain recommendations to be implemented. It was a national task force. The president then appointed a coffee sector implementation committee to coordinate the implementation of those reforms. One of the reforms was that Nairobi Coffee Exchange was supposed to be restructured into a fully fledged coffee exchange under the regulation of Capital Markets Authority. This is way back in 2016. Then what followed was the Capital Markets Act was then amended to bring into the ambit of CMA regulation of commodity markets. But specifically, it's the businesses which are around the exchanges. So whatever goes on within the exchanges then would fall under Capital Markets Authority. So the Act was then amended in 2016, and to operationalize those specific provisions, that coordination committee, Presidential Coordination Committee, working with the stakeholders, went through a very transparent, very engaging process to come up with various regulations. Now, you realize the commodities markets are very wide. In fact, they cover agricultural and non-agricultural products. But because coffee has taken off already, there were specific regulations that were then enacted. First, we had the crop coffee general regulations 2019 that were then passed and signed off by the Minister of Agriculture. And if you look at those regulations, they give CMA actually the powers to regulate activities within the coffee exchange. It means the exchange itself, the players, the systems which are used in the exchange. Last year, then, to operationalize it properly within the CMA, the ministry, the CS Nation Treasury actually then gazetted the Capital Markets Coffee Exchange Regulations 2020.
In July this year, the Cabinet Secretary, Ministry of Agriculture, did issue a statement essentially denouncing the role that CMA is playing as far as the licensing is concerned. How do you assess this situation? How do we get to a point where we are harmonizing the role that the Coffee Directorate under the Ministry of Agriculture is playing and the Capital Markets Authority under the Ministry of the National Treasury is playing?
They are very separate mandates within the value chain. The production ecosystem has nothing to do with CMA. CMA is less interested in how coffee is produced, but we'll do what we can do to support those who are involved in that ecosystem. But in terms of regulation, it falls under the Ministry of Agriculture and other organs like AFA and others. And obviously, there is a role county governments are also playing. When it comes to warehousing system, receipts system, you also realize this is still under the ministry. So we aren't in that space. The space we are in is the one around coffee exchange itself. And perhaps maybe for people just to understand, if you look at the way commodities have grown, there are specific contracts that come in at the end which are very important, and they have supported the growth of those specific sectors where the commodities come from, be they agricultural, non-agricultural. So because of the intention to have specific financial instruments or contracts may be traded at a future date, which then catalyzes, the production of those commodities as and when they are in operation. I think CMA has an interest in starting from where we have the spot market. Now, if you look at it, we are just in the market. And in fact, our focus is more of the exchange itself, how the exchange is running its business, and then the players in there. The players will be coffee marketing brokers who have been created in the new regulations. And then, of course, we look at the systems that are being used in the exchange to just ensure there is a robust infrastructure that allows the players in there to do their job in a way which is very facilitative, with being in mind of the very original objective of having a very transparent way of price discovery, and of course just ensuring the farmer who is on the ground gets value as they see it on the exchange.
On the 28th of June this year, the CMA granted the full license to the Meru County Marketing Agency, the first full license if I recall well. I'm reliably informed that it hasn't been able to trade under the CMA license. It is still trading under the license issued as a marketing agency by the Coffee Directorate. And the question here becomes, are you engaging in an exercise in futility? Because we have seen you issue 2 other full licenses just last week.
Our understanding is we've given Meru a license which should enable them to trade at Nairobi Coffee Exchange, because that is what is in the law. However, we also recognize the fact that Nairobi Coffee Exchange requires to be restructured to a fully fledged exchange, where perhaps because it is a mutualized outfit as we speak now, I think the people behind Nairobi Coffee have specific rights under the current structure, which of course means we need to see how that is restructured, so that you allow easy entrance into the space of the exchange to allow people do their business very easily. And you can imagine we have issued guidances which have gone to Nairobi Coffee. Of course, even the ministry is aware of this. Our hope, because we know Nairobi Coffee Exchange is addressing the guidances we've given them, at some point they will have to come to us and say this is what they're doing about them. But let me just say, our mandate to license coffee exchange marketing brokers actually, as given in the law, allows them to do business in whichever exchange that will come up. And obviously, I know there are discussion on COMEX, which is a multi-asset exchange, which then even the same brokers we have licensed, if it became operational or any other exchange, then they can still use the license which we've given to them. So for me, it is an issue of time, because even Nairobi Coffee Exchange is also addressing certain things. Of course, they require space to put in systems which are expected as the law has provided. Of course, we have the issue of direct settlement system, TSS. We speak about this very frequently. And then, of course, how they ensure the structures which are required to oversight those who are doing business within the exchange do it properly. are also in place. So those are discussions we are having, and we are hoping once it is done, then this will be resolved.
The Coffee Exchange regulations empower the Capital Markets Authority to issue licenses not just for brokers, but also for any party who wishes to set up an exchange. Have you received any such interest?
As we speak, I think, let me be very clear, our focus as a country has been on COMEX, because we realize, yes, there are ongoing auctions now, and obviously those auctions are market platforms, of course the likes of coffee, but I think as a nation, we were looking at having a multi-asset exchange, which is coming in the outfit of COMEX. You will realize COMEX actually is in the process of being operationalized. It has, of course, the structures that started, and we are hoping that at some point, we have already engaged with them, given them, what they need to comply with, because literally that is where the government has a lot of push in terms of how do we have platforms which then enable different commodities to be traded. However, I want to mention that a lot of interest also from private sector in terms of can we set up exchanges within commodities, and obviously some of the interests have been supported by interest from external sources, but we have been cautious this far because I think we need to see how we nurture the domestic structures which are existing, and then of course look at the overall government direction in terms of where do we get in terms of, let's say, setting up COMEX as the main exchange. Then of course at that point, then we can see whether it will be appropriate to have any other exchange licensed.
There's a lot of concern out here regarding how farmers' proceeds will be safeguarded, considering a direct settlement system is not in place. First, for those of us who might not know what that is, just explain that to us, a direct settlement system. And secondly, what assurance can you give?
So that we make the process of a farmer receiving their proceeds very easily, that process is usually automated through the facilities we receive maybe from the banks, and also even we can have CSD which is performing the same process, and of course just ensuring that this process is automated. Of course, the way money comes into the system up to the point when the money reaches the farmer on the ground. It is a more safer system because then you are off the manual system, and therefore money will always go to the right party, because this is what is structured within the procedures which run within a direct settlement system. Now, for the point we are in now, where we don't have a direct settlement system yet in place, all the marketing agents who are actually involved in the auctions are required to have a bank guarantee. And of course, they have approached several banking institutions which give certain assurances that the system will run as it has up to the end. And I think this is where we are saying maybe that manual system needs to be automated so that we don't even require the issue of bank guarantees. Money comes in and it then flows to the directions where it needs to flow as it's given in the procedures. Now, maybe on the area of TSS, let me mention we are very encouraged because we've seen a lot of interest from several members of Kenya Bankers Association who have shown quite very high interest in giving this system. We have assessed applications and we are in the process of finalizing. You'll be shocked to learn that even some of them have tested those systems, and we have witnessed, the testing, and so far they sound very firm, and we know as and when they are ready for licensing, we won't have an issue around TSS when that is done. So just to confirm, yes, we are in the process, and a lot of interest, and of course, one has even been tested, and we are hoping that once they are cleared through the requirements, then we'll have a direct settlement system in place. But let me stress the issue of the system. It is not for the authority. It is a system which is owned by the exchange. And we are feeling that once Nairobi Coffee Exchange is more enabled in terms of structures, capacity, and others, then we can see this system in place, which then makes the rest of the process more efficient, more than what we see in the manual environment.
Mr. Shame, let me ask, in your assessment, in what time horizon are we likely to see the DSS then coming online?
Well, we had given Nairobi Coffee Exchange up to December this year to put in place most of these structures. Maybe because of what has gone on, maybe we may delay slightly, but our hope had been by December this year, they have actually transitioned into a demutualized kind of outfit where you separate management from ownership, and of course it becomes a more profit-oriented organization and therefore serving more efficiently than the form they are now in. And it was also expected that by end of December this year, they will have their own rules in place, because operations within the exchange are usually oversighted by the exchange itself as a self-regulatory organization. And therefore, they need to have their own rules in place. But more importantly, I think if you recall, Nairobi Coffee Exchange doesn't have the proper governance structures in place. As in, when you talk about the board and, of course, all those structures that strengthens how an organization then delivers on its mandate, I think we need to have that in place. And I think working together with the Ministry of Agriculture, these are points where we need to address. And as we address this, then, the issue of DSS becomes more appropriate because this is an enhanced exchange as it is expected in law.
Those of us who are more futuristic in our outlook envision a situation whereby this country will be able to have a derivatives market for the commodities side in place, given the sort of precedent we are seeing with the coffee exchange regulations. What's your assessment in terms of just the level of preparedness that this market has for that sort of eventuality?
Thank you. And maybe let me comment from the point of coffee, because that is the one where I think the spot market seems to be more organized. Of course, there are others, tea, maize, but let me speak from the point of coffee, because at least we have an exchange which is in operation now. Derivatives markets are usually very sensitive to the underlying assets. And I think if you look at it in terms of them being financial contracts on certain underlying assets, we must have calm in the markets which actually the underlying assets are being traded. So this depends on how we get our coffee industry more in a calm, and that we transform Nairobi Coffee into a fully fledged exchange so that it starts running fully as an exchange. This way then we will allow and we will be in a position to see whether maybe in 2 years, 1 year, we can introduce derivatives based on the coffee as the underlying asset. But it doesn't stop any other commodity which comes up faster and obviously has a good spot market which is very organized. Transitioning into even having derivatives may be traded on an exchange. I need to mention Nairobi Securities Exchange has a provision for doing even commodities derivatives, but I think the priority for now has been contracts based on financial instruments. If somebody decided to list contracts on a commodity exchange, when this is now allowed on Nairobi Securities Exchange, I think it is a point we'll see at that point. So I guess it is how fast we move in the spot market to allow other secondary instruments then to come in. But if we had it stabilized, I see that happening maybe in a period of, say, 2 years after we have the proper spot market in place.
Let's wrap up this conversation, Mr. Shamia. I spoke to a couple of stakeholders, and granted you have said that CMA is not involved in the end-to-end value chain of the coffee market, but there's so much concern around CMA's capacity for oversight, financially, logistically, of these various brokers which it is licensing. And the reason is coffee is spread across the country. Does that concern you, or how would you comment on that sort of concern?
Just to comment that, yes, CMA is in the process of building capacity in terms of just getting the right skills which will oversight the issue of coffee as one of our areas of mandate. Maybe just again to confirm, we have a full function which has now been created within the CMA just to work on commodities, and of course mainly now they are working on coffee. But I want to say, as that function operates within the authority, we have the rest of their market operations, which then supports this function. For example, you realize for all the licenses we have approved, we conducted physical inspections. Now, from the question you asked, I also wanted to clarify that because we are not doing the full chain oversight, we have county governments where this production is taking place, processing is taking place. They have their own mandates as far as regulation is concerned. We have the Ministry of Agriculture that actually then takes on most of the functions. We are only limited on what is happening within the exchange. I think the capacity we have for now can work very well as we expand this. Most likely, maybe at a future date, maybe we start thinking of, do we separate the markets? Because coffee and other commodities may require a lot of attention, just the way the main capital markets are now. So as it is in the present time, I think I'm not seeing a lot of challenges because if you look at the brokers we have licensed, they're just around 5. And because we are not actually engaging every farmer on the ground, you find it's not really a very big challenge to us. I think we interact with the brokers who we license and the exchange. But let me also just mention, when we talk about the exchange being the first line regulator, because most of the exchanges will operate as self-regulatory organizations, they have regulatory responsibilities. And because they are the ones who interact with their players in the first instance, they then become the first line regulators. You will then, of course, know as it is, there are responsibilities which Nairobi Coffee Exchange is taking on in their being the ones who offer the auction platform. And there are certain things they do, and obviously we will support that because they do part of the oversighting roles that will fall under the regulator.
My final question, Mr. Shamia. We now have, I think, 3 full licenses, 2 others on provisional status. What's your pipeline of licensing looking like? And why that question is of critical importance for us is that there is the view that there is apathy as far as brokers coming on board are concerned. If you look at some of the main coffee growing areas, we don't see representative from that side, and yet we would have thought that they would have been first online seeking this licensing.
Well, I know that has been a discussion even in the media, but One, I think we are just 4 months from when we operationalize this, and obviously there is the transition period where people are making certain decisions. But in terms of pipeline, we already have 2 applications, which I think very soon again, when they meet the full requirements, they will be cleared and licensed fully as marketing brokers. We have had a lot of engagements with the Council of Governors just around our role, because we all appreciate that they also play a very key role because they implement most of the requirements in these regulations, of course, because that is where the farmer sits, that is where the factories sit, and the processings are done from the grassroots where they are. And the feeling we have is for most of the coffee growing areas, counties, they would like to have their own marketing agents or brokers in the exchange. So as we look at this, I think most of the counties where coffee is grown, at the end of the day, of course, farmers want to have a say in how their coffee is being marketed. Most of these counties will have to come for a license. And maybe just to clarify, as long as the current law stays the way it is, for you to do business in the exchange, you require a license from the capital markets. We are playing a very facilitative role now because we notice we need to give transition to the structures that exist so that there is proper continuity of business. We don't want to disrupt the value chain as is, because I think we need to be part of the problem solving other than causing a bit of disruptions. But this, on the other hand, doesn't mean that we condone violation or we are disregarding the law. It's just an issue of how do we facilitate those who require to do business within the exchange.
At that point, by Mr. Shamia, takes us to the close of our conversation, where we have been taking a deep dive into the coffee exchange regulations of 2020 and what they mean for the coffee market in this country.